Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for allowing me to kind of share my story with you all. So, my name is Rochelle Obiekwe, and before I delve into my story living with sickle cell, I kind of just wanted to share a little bit about myself. So, I'm 27 years old, and I was born and raised in Georgia, and I attended the University of Georgia for both undergraduate and graduate school. Go Dogs! And I now work as a fellow at the CDC conducting surveillance on fatal drug overdose. And in my free time, I love to cook, I love to listen to Beyonce, and of course, I love to volunteer with the Red Cross. And I just wanted to give a little background because, when I was writing my story to share with you all, it really made me realize how far I've come living with sickle cell and enduring the struggles that come with this disease. And hopefully, my story, helps put a face to one of those thousands of sickle cell recipients that your work with the Red Cross helps to give blood to. And as I mentioned later, I spent a lot of time growing up in the Children's Healthcare of Atlanta's Cancer and Blood Disorders Unit. And on the wall, they had a quote of children with cancer and blood disorders. And one of those quotes that my dad kind of forced and ingrained into my memory is that my disease doesn't define me, I define my disease. And I kind of try to live by that every single day. So now that you know that, I'll share my story living with sickle cell disease and how the Red Cross has really impacted my life. So, of course, I was born with sickle cell disease, and as many of you know, there are many types of sickle cell disease. I was born with sickle cell anemia, which is hemoglobin type SS, and that's the most severe form of sickle cell disease. So, being a child of kind of two immigrants, both of my parents were born and raised in Nigeria and came here in the 1980s and 1990s. Genetic testing wasn't really a common practice in their home country of Nigeria, nor was it really super popular back in the 90s here in America as it is now. And as a result, my parents didn't really know that they both had the sickle cell trait because nobody on either side of our family had sickle cell disease or sickle cell trait that they knew of. I just wanted to share also that I'm a twin. I have a fraternal twin brother. And so at our newborn screening performed at Northside Hospital, they determined that both my brother and I have sickle cell anemia. So living with sickle cell disease has truly shaped my life in more ways than one. Growing up, I didn't have the quintessential childhood because there are just so many external and internal factors that can influence my health, and my parents were extremely protective of myself and my brother as a result. So because of my condition, I wasn't able to participate in school sports because of the strenuous exercise increases blood flow and dehydration, which can lead to blocked blood vessels and sickled cells and painful crises. I wasn't able to go to summer camp because the Georgia summers of 80 and 90 and 100 degrees are really risky for even the normal person. But for somebody with sickle cell, the heat can lead to dehydration and sickling and sickle cell crises. So instead of, the normal after school and weekend extracurriculars, my afternoons and my weekends were spent at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta getting these routine checkups that we kind of spend all day at. And it really became my second home. Sickle cell is really interesting because it manifests differently from person to person with the disease. And it can also change from childhood to adolescence to adulthood. And, this was something that could really be seen just looking at the difference between my twin brother and I. My brother also has sickle cell anemia, same genotype, hemoglobin type SS, but outside of his blood work being abnormal, he never really got sick. And the doctors and myself were quite mystified by this because unfortunately I was the sick child. My blood counts were very low and I had sickle cell crises quite often, especially and unfortunately in the middle of the night. There were hundreds of times where my dad would drive me to the emergency room at Scottish Rite at, 1, 2, 3 in the morning so that I could receive care. And it's kind of hard to explain my pain even today, but even more so as a child who can't really communicate their feelings. And it manifests differently each time, but the pain can be so severe that you literally feel like you want to amputate an arm or a leg, or it feels like somebody's literally stabbing you in the back. And because my episodes were quite frequent, I often received blood transfusions to help increase my healthy blood supply. And, I don't remember my first blood transfusion because I was extremely young when that happened, but I do remember a very poignant memory that was etched, that kind of etched the importance of blood transfusions and donations into my brain, which I will now share. So, to provide context, red blood cells release hemoglobin when they burst. So, in the blood, hemoglobin breaks down to a pigment called bilirubin. And when too many cells burst, which happens often in sickle cell because sickled cells have a very short lifespan, the bilirubin will build up and collect in the gallbladder, forming clumps. And this is called gallstones. So in 2005, I was in the third grade having extremely painful spasms in my abdominal region. And for over a week, I was nauseous, throwing up, and in pain. And, my mom thought it was just a stomach bug. But after it lasting more than 72 hours, she grew concerned and she took me to the ER where they performed an ultrasound and they saw that I had gallstones just everywhere. And as a result, they scheduled me for emergency gallstone surgery that same week. And, during the interim, I was placed in the hospital so that the doctors could monitor my symptoms and push me with fluids. And, with any medical emergency, we're always worried about how my sickle cell will play a role. And while gallstone removal is supposed to be kind of minimally invasive laparoscopic surgery, in which the operation and recovery process is kind of short and sweet, it's simply just not the case for somebody with sickle cell. So, at the point prior to my surgery, my hemoglobin levels and my red blood cells had gotten so low that I was having critically dangerous crises in the hospital on top of the gallstone related pain. So, there was concern for how I would fare during surgery and recovery. And, the most severe concerns for sickle cell patients are acute chest syndrome, where you kind of have this clumping in the lungs, a clumping of blood cells in the lungs, and stroke. And, this could happen after surgery. So even though, I was actively in a crisis and it was clear that I needed to have this surgery to remove these gallbladders, and the gallstones, the doctors made the decision the day of the surgery to kind of just delay it and prep my blood supply. So I have A negative blood, so I can receive only A negative or O negative donors. And, they kind of had to scramble to find me a match. But, the night before the surgery, I was given a blood transfusion, and I just vividly remember laying in the hospital bed with a bag of blood propped up next to me. And, as a child, I wasn't a stranger to transfusions, but again, I was kind of simply told that this was something to make me feel better, and I didn't think of anything of it. But, sitting in that hospital room for some reason made me fully aware that this blood transfusion was something that was going to fix my life, like save my life. And that was kind of my first true realization of how life-saving a blood transfusion can be for somebody like me, somebody with sickle cell. I remember looking at the blood transfusion and then looking back at my dad who was sitting next to me. And, I was a dramatic child, but I literally asked my dad, I was like, am I going to die? Like, is this going to save my life? And, I was terrified. And my dad really, explained to me that this transfusion is here to make me feel better and it's here to save my life and I will be okay. So even though I was only like 9 when it happened, I never really forgot how important it was to receive that blood transfusion and how grateful I was to be able to receive it. So, even as a child, I just remember wanting to thank whoever donated the blood because it really went to somebody who needed it most. So as I grew out of my adolescence and into childhood, I had less severe crises and medical emergencies that kind of landed me in the emergency room as I did as a child. And, I know this isn't the case for every person with sickle cell. However, I take hydroxyurea now, which is a prescription that kind of helps do the work of replacing my adult hemoglobin with fetal hemoglobin, which carries more oxygen and as a result kind of reduces the amount of sickled cells in my bloodstream. So as a result, I don't get as many transfusions now. But even though I don't receive as many transfusions, that time that I received that life-saving transfusion in 2005 and many times before that is kind of the reason that I started volunteering with the Red Cross as a blood donor ambassador and drive diversity advocate. Because, the representation of Black and African American people in the national blood supply is really extremely important for recipients to receive a blood donor match close to theirs, to which can improve their chance of having a better health outcome. And unfortunately, we simply just don't have the representation yet needed to be able to support all of the blood recipients like myself who need it. Especially, sickle cell patients who need those chronic transfusions. After a while, you start to see a lot of antigens in their blood, and it becomes harder to find a match. So the closer blood donor matches that we find is the best opportunity that we can to help these people. So, sometimes blindly donating isn't really enough, and there's unfortunately a history of mistrust in the U.S. medical system when it comes to previous mistreatment of Black and brown individuals. So it's important to me to be able to show people who donate that their donations really make a difference, and I wouldn't be here without their support. So, I'll never forget the day that I was working a shift and, an African American man came in and he wasn't having the best day. He expressed his frustration with having to wait to be called, and he just wanted to walk in and give blood, which we really appreciate. But he was telling me he just feel like his donation wasn't appreciated, and that really made me sad, and that's when I was able to step in and share with him how much we do appreciate his support, because I'm a direct recipient of donations like his, because I do have sickle cell. And, once I shared that, like, his entire demeanor changed, and he thanked me for being a volunteer, and I told him there's nothing to be upset about because I completely empathize with him. And it's moments like that which help me connect with donors, and it really makes everything worth it. So I just love being a Red Cross volunteer, and I really thank the Red Cross for allowing me to share my story, and I hope it kind of gives you some insight into me being both a volunteer and a recipient.